I can still hear her laughter as she mocked my old flip phone, her voice dripping with condescension. "Mom, you're too old to understand technology." In that moment, as my daughter dismissed me with a casual cruelty only family can inflict, 30 years of silence pressed against my heart like a physical weight. If only she knew that her sleek iPhone, her precious connection to the modern world, carried my fingerprints in its very soul. What happens when a lifetime of invisibility suddenly shatters? When the woman everyone dismissed as technologically challenged is revealed to be the silent genius behind 47 patents that power billions of devices worldwide? I never chose to be erased from history, but I did choose my daughter over my legacy. Now, as my name resurfaces in a high-stakes patent court, the truth I've buried for decades threatens to destroy everything, including the relationship with the daughter I sacrificed everything to protect. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or forced to choose between your dreams and your family, this is a story that will break your heart, and then carefully piece it back together. Follow my channel for more stories that expose the invisible threads connecting our lives, and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Sometimes the most powerful innovations aren't the ones that change technology, but the ones that change how we see each other. I can still hear her laughter echoing through our kitchen that morning, the way it bounced off the worn tile walls my late husband and I had installed together back in '78. My daughter, Caroline, glanced at my old flip phone resting on the countertop while she sipped her overpriced coffee from that fancy place on Main Street. The way her eyes narrowed slightly, that look I'd seen 1,000 times before from colleagues in lab coats who thought I couldn't understand their equations. "Mom," she said with that patronizing smile that made her look just like her father, "you're too old to understand technology." In that instant, I felt my heart crack, not shatter, just crack along a fault line that had been forming for years. It wasn't the comment itself. It was the dismissal behind those words. I was being reduced to an outdated relic, a burden of age, a shadow that no longer served any purpose in this bright, shiny world she inhabited. I looked down at my hands, these wrinkled hands that had once been steady enough to solder microscopic connections no one else in the lab could manage. These hands that had held my screaming baby girl through countless nights after Thomas died. These hands that had signed away my future on contracts I was too desperate to read properly. "Maybe you're right," I said quietly, picking up my flip phone. The ancient Nokia felt heavy with irony. If she only knew that the slim, gleaming iPhone she clutched like it was part of her identity carried within it fragments of my soul, my sweat, my sleepless nights, pieces of the 47 patents that never bore my name, but lived inside the technology she couldn't imagine living without. I was invisible even to my own daughter. Caroline patted my shoulder as she headed for the door. "I've got to run. Big presentation today. Love you, Mom." The door slammed, and the house fell silent again. Just me and the ticking of the grandfather clock that Thomas had restored before cancer took him too early. That night, I sat alone at my kitchen table, the one spot of light in my darkened house, and stared at an old shoebox I'd pulled from the back of my closet. Inside were yellowed papers, engineering sketches with my handwriting in the margins, and photographs of younger versions of myself standing in labs that would later become the birthplace of the modern smartphone revolution. I ran my finger over a signature at the bottom of one document, Margaret Eleanor Winters, next to a date from 1983. There was a coffee stain in the corner where my brother-in-law David had spilled his cup the day he convinced me to sign. "Just a formality," he'd said. "Nothing to worry about. Those patents would later sell for millions." I received a modest bonus and a handshake. I tucked everything back into the box but kept out one photograph, me at 32, standing proudly next to a prototype that would eventually evolve into technology that now powered my daughter's world. My eyes in that photo held a confidence I barely recognized anymore. I placed the photograph face down on my bedside table that night, and as I drifted off to sleep, a thought crystallized in my mind with perfect clarity. Secrets don't stay buried forever. The next morning, I woke to a text from Caroline. "Sorry about yesterday. Dinner tonight? My treat." I typed back a simple, "Yes," but something had shifted inside me. For 37 years, I'd kept my silence. I'd let my contribution to the world fade into obscurity. I'd accepted being the sweet, technologically challenged mother who couldn't program her own DVR. But looking at my flip phone now, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades, a slow burning anger. Not at my daughter, but at the system that had made me invisible. At David, who had built his fortune on my ideas. At myself, for allowing it all to happen. I picked up my old Nokia and pressed the power button, watching the simple screen light up. No facial recognition, no fingerprint scanner, no apps, just basic communication. How ironic that I chose to carry this relic when my fingerprints were all over the technology that had made it obsolete. That evening would change everything. What Caroline didn't know, what nobody knew, was that earlier that day I'd received a call from a patent lawyer who had been digging through old Bell Labs archives and found something that shouldn't have been there, something with my name on it that had never been properly transferred. And that discovery was about to blow our worlds apart. I smoothed my blouse and looked in the mirror. At 68, my hair had gone silver, and lines mapped my face like circuit diagrams. But my eyes, they had regained that spark from the photograph. The spark of a woman who was tired of being invisible. And it was on that day I realized, secrets don't stay buried forever. Sometimes they rise to the surface when you least expect them, demanding to be acknowledged. I didn't choose to be invisible. Invisibility was thrust upon me, layer by layer, like sediment building up over a fossil until the original shape is forgotten entirely. When Thomas died of pancreatic cancer in 1983, I was 34 with a 7-year-old daughter and a mortgage I couldn't afford. The funeral was on a Tuesday. By Friday, I had packed away my research notes and accepted a position as a technician at Bell Labs in Massachusetts, a dramatic step down from my previous role as a research engineer, but one that came with stability and health insurance for Caroline. The Boston winters were harsh that decade. I remember scraping ice off my windshield at 5:30 a.m., fingers numb despite my gloves, rushing to drop Caroline at my neighbor's house before the morning shift. Back then, in the early 80s, I was developing miniaturized circuit components that everyone said would never work, components that would eventually become fundamental to mobile communication. "Margaret, these tolerance levels are impossible," Dr. Harmon would say, peering over my sketches with a patronizing smile. "The silicon simply won't hold up." But I knew better. I'd been experimenting with new alloys in my garage on weekends, testing theories that the senior engineers, all men, of course, dismissed as fantasy. I still have the burn scar on my left wrist from one of those weekend experiments. Caroline called it my wizard mark when she was little. My brothers thought I was wasting my time. At family dinners, they'd exchange glances when I talked about my work. "Maggie, a widow shouldn't be messing with machines," my older brother Jack would say, spooning more mashed potatoes onto his plate. "You should be focusing on raising Caroline, right?" Only David, my sister Ellen's husband, seemed interested. He'd ask questions about my research, compliment my technical drawings, even offer to introduce me to investors. At the time, his attention felt like validation, the only acknowledgement in a world that seemed determined to look past me. "You've got a brilliant mind, Maggie," he told me one evening as he helped me carry dishes to the kitchen after a family dinner. Ellen was in the living room, showing Caroline her new knitting pattern. "The world needs your ideas." I can still remember how those words made me stand taller, made me feel seen when invisibility had become my default state. That's the dangerous thing about craving recognition. It makes you vulnerable to those who would exploit it. I still remember the day I signed that first document, April 17, 1985. Rain pelted the windows of David's downtown office where he worked as legal counsel for a tech investment firm. Caroline had a fever that day, 101.3 degrees. I remember checking it 3 times before leaving her with my neighbor, and I was distracted, worried about her. "It's just standard paperwork," David said, sliding the thick document across his polished mahogany desk. "The company wants to develop your capacitor design, but they need the proper rights. You'll get royalties, of course." I flipped through the pages, technical language swimming before my exhausted eyes. "What's this clause about assignment of intellectual property?" David smiled reassuringly. "Just legal jargon. It means they can produce your design. Nothing to worry about, Maggie." I signed my name on the dotted line, not comprehending that I was signing away not just that specific design, but all related implementations and derivatives thereof. My signature was there, clear as day, but the name listed as the principal inventor on the patent filing that followed 3 months later wasn't mine. It was David's. When I confronted him, showing him the patent filing I'd discovered by accident, his friendly demeanor vanished like morning dew under a harsh sun. "You signed the papers, Margaret," he said coldly. Everything was legal and above board. The company needed a name they could market, someone with the right connections. He straightened his tie. Silk, expensive, bought with money that should have been partly mine. You should be grateful. That little design of yours wouldn't have gone anywhere without proper backing. That night, I sat in my kitchen until dawn, tears silently tracking down my face, fury and shame battling for dominance in my chest. I had a choice to make: fight against a system of millionaire directors and their army of attorneys, or accept this theft in silence and continue providing for my daughter with the modest salary that still came my way. I chose silence. And with that choice, I planted the seed of shame that would grow inside me for decades, twisted roots wrapping around my heart until I could barely recognize the passionate engineer I'd once been. But one phrase from that confrontation with David never left my mind. As I was leaving his office, shoulders slumped in defeat, he called after me, "You don't need recognition to be important, Maggie." At the time, I thought it was meant as consolation. Today, looking back through the lens of decades, I recognize it for what it truly was: theft disguised as wisdom. That night, after receiving the lawyer's call about the archive discovery, I opened my jewelry box and removed a small key I'd kept hidden all these years. Tomorrow, after dinner with Caroline, I would finally open the storage unit I'd maintained since 1987, the one containing every notebook, every prototype, every piece of evidence I'd secretly preserved. Evidence that would shatter the carefully constructed fiction that had made David wealthy and kept me invisible. That moment, standing in David's office with the patent papers trembling in my hands, was my crossroads, a single decision that would echo through decades of my life like a stone dropped into still water, ripples touching shores I couldn't yet imagine. I remember the weight of that choice crushing down on me. Fight a legal system designed to protect men like David, with their connections and resources and power, or accept the injustice in silence and ensure Caroline would never miss a meal, never have to leave our modest home, never know her mother had failed. I can still feel the texture of the silk blouse I'd worn that day. My professional outfit, navy blue with small pearl buttons that Caroline loved to count. I'd saved for 3 months to buy it, wanting to look the part of a serious engineer when I met with David about potentially marketing my designs. The irony of wearing it to discover my own betrayal wasn't lost on me. Outside his office window, Boston's financial district gleamed in the April sunshine, oblivious to my small tragedy. A world where men in expensive suits made decisions that shaped lives like mine without a second thought. "You have 24 hours to reconsider your position, Margaret," David said, leaning back in his leather chair, so confident in his victory. "The company is prepared to offer you a modest consultant fee for your contributions. $5,000. $5,000 for technology that would eventually be worth millions." My hands clenched into fists, nails digging crescents into my palms. "And if I go public?" My voice sounded strange to my own ears. Tight, thin, like a wire about to snap. David's smile never reached his eyes. "With what evidence? Your signature is on the transfer documents. And Ellen..." He paused, knowing exactly where to twist the knife. Ellen would be devastated to learn her husband and her sister were in a dispute, especially after all she's done to help with Caroline since Thomas passed. There it was, the implied threat. Not just legal action, but family destruction. Ellen had been my rock after Thomas died, watching Caroline countless times when I worked late, bringing casseroles when I was too exhausted to cook. The thought of hurting her, of dividing our already fractured family, was unbearable. I chose silence, and with that silence I chose invisibility. That night I walked through our small Cape Cod-style house in the Boston suburbs, touching things Thomas had built. The bookshelf in the living room, the window seat in Caroline's bedroom where she read her Nancy Drew mysteries. I felt like a ghost in my own life, transparent and powerless. Caroline was at a sleepover that night, laughing and watching movies with friends, blissfully unaware that her mother had just surrendered something precious. I was grateful for her absence. It gave me space to break down completely, sobbing into Thomas's old flannel shirt that I still kept in my bottom drawer. "What would you have done?" I whispered to his memory, clutching the worn fabric that somehow still held a whisper of his scent. Sawdust and that Old Spice aftershave he'd used. How do I fight this? The silence offered no answers, just as it hadn't when the doctors told us his cancer had spread too far, too fast. I made my decision in that hollow night. I would take the consultant fee. I would continue working. I would build a life for Caroline that would give her opportunities I never had. And I would document everything, every design, every idea, every patent that should have carried my name, storing it all away like evidence for a trial that might never come. The seed of shame planted that day grew alongside a smaller, hardier seed of determination. If I couldn't have recognition, I would at least have truth, even if I kept it locked away. The next morning, I called David from a payphone near Caroline's school. "I'll take the deal," I said flatly when he answered. I could hear the smugness in his voice. "Wise choice, Maggie. I'll have the papers drawn up. One condition," I said, surprising even myself with my boldness. "I stay on as lead technician for the development team." A pause. "Why would you want that?" "Because I needed to see my creation through. Because I couldn't bear to be completely cut out of my own invention's life. Because some small part of me hoped that eventually someone would recognize the truth. Because I'm the only one who fully understands the implementation," I replied instead, keeping my voice businesslike. "You know that." Another pause, longer this time. "Fine, but you'll sign an expanded NDA. And Margaret?" This conversation never happened. I hung up without responding, watching a young mother push a stroller past the phone booth. Her little boy was pointing excitedly at a squirrel darting up a nearby tree, his face alight with wonder. I wondered if his mother had dreams beyond motherhood, if she too would someday face a choice between those dreams and his welfare. "You don't need to be recognized to be important." The phrase came back to me, bitter as wormwood. In that moment, I understood something that would sustain me through the years ahead. Recognition and importance aren't the same thing. My work would matter, would change the world in ways even David couldn't imagine, whether my name was attached to it or not. I walked back to my car with my shoulders straight, a plan forming in my mind. I would be invisible, but I would not be powerless. I would work within the system that had betrayed me, gathering knowledge, perfecting my designs, building something that would outlast all of us. And perhaps someday, the truth would find its way to the light. What I didn't know then, couldn't have known, was how high the cost of that silence would ultimately be, not measured in dollars or patents, but in relationships destroyed and truths untold. The most valuable things in life are often the ones we don't recognize until they're gone. The consequences of my silence were devastating in ways I couldn't have anticipated that day in David's office. Ripples became waves, washing away foundations I had thought unshakable. My relationship with Ellen deteriorated first. Sisters who had once finished each other's sentences became strangers exchanging pleasantries at family gatherings. I couldn't look her in the eye, knowing what her husband had done, unable to tell her the truth. She sensed the change, the sudden wall between us, and drew her own conclusions. "You've always been jealous of what David and I have," she said to me during Thanksgiving dinner in 1986, her voice low so the rest of the family couldn't hear as we washed dishes in our mother's kitchen. The yellow linoleum floor beneath our feet was worn thin in spots, a reminder of all the holidays we'd spent side by side in this room. "Ever since Thomas died, you can't stand to see anyone else happy." The ceramic serving dish I was drying nearly slipped from my hands. "That's not true," I whispered, throat tight with unshed tears and unspoken truths. Ellen's face hardened, the resemblance between us momentarily erased by her expression. "Then why do you look at David like he's something stuck to your shoe? Why do you barely speak to me anymore?" She shook her head, water dripping from her soapy hands onto the faded floor. "You're obsessed with your little gadgets in that lab with recognition. You can't stand that David is successful while you're still tinkering away in obscurity." The irony was so bitter I could taste it, metallic like blood. But I couldn't tell her the truth, that her beloved husband had built his success on my stolen work. It would destroy her, destroy our family. So I said nothing, and in my silence, she found confirmation of her worst suspicions. "I feel sorry for Caroline," she added, the final twist of the knife, growing up with a mother so bitter. By the time Caroline entered high school in 1990, Ellen and I spoke only at Christmas and family funerals. My nieces and nephews, who had once clamored for attention from their Aunt Maggie the inventor, now treated me with the awkward politeness reserved for distant relatives. The pitiful aunt. I once overheard my nephew call me at a family reunion. Meanwhile, Caroline grew up knowing nothing of my work's true significance. To her, I was simply Mom, the woman who clipped grocery coupons and sewed Halloween costumes instead of buying them, who drove a sensible Volvo until it practically fell apart. The woman who worked late at a tech company in a position that never seemed to advance. "Why don't you ever get promoted, Mom?" she asked me once, 14 years old and brutally direct, her braces catching the kitchen light as she frowned at me across our dinner table. "Mrs. Peterson says you're, like, super smart. So why are you still just a technician?" I remember setting down my fork carefully, buying time to compose my answer. "Some people climb ladders, honey. Others build the rungs." She rolled her eyes, already bored with my cryptic response, more interested in whether Jason Miller had noticed her new haircut at school that day. I watched her push peas around her plate, this beautiful girl on the cusp of womanhood, and wondered if I'd made the right choice all those years ago. Would she have been prouder of a mother who fought and lost everything, or one who compromised and kept their life stable? I never found the courage to ask. By 1995, my name was on internal documentation for 17 different patents owned by the company, all of which listed other inventors, mostly men, mostly David's associates, on the official filings. The capacitor design that started it all had evolved into components used in early cellular phones, satellite systems, and military communications equipment. I watched from my laboratory bench as my creations changed the world, my contributions invisible to all but a few. During those years, I buried myself in my work, finding solace in the elegance of circuitry, in problems that could be solved through persistence and intellect. I kept meticulous records in journals I stored in a safety deposit box at a bank across town, away from prying eyes. Not as evidence for some future vindication. I'd long since abandoned that fantasy. But as testament, I existed. I created, even if no one else ever knew. What Caroline also never knew during those years was the second secret I carried. In 1994, doctors diagnosed me with a congenital heart condition, a ticking time bomb that could claim my life at any moment. Hypertrophic cardiomyopathy, an abnormal thickening of the heart muscle that could trigger sudden cardiac arrest without warning. With medication and careful monitoring, you could live decades, Dr. Abernathy told me in his cluttered office, the anatomy model of a heart sitting accusingly on his desk between us. But there's always risk of sudden episodes. I didn't tell Caroline. She was 16, preparing for college applications, dreaming of a future unlimited by the constraints that had shaped my life. I didn't tell anyone. Another secret to carry, another weight pressing down. Sometimes at night, lying awake listening to the soft tick of the bedside clock Thomas had repaired in our first year of marriage, I would imagine dying suddenly, at work, in the grocery store, in my sleep, and Caroline finding those journals afterward, discovering who her mother really was only after I was gone. The thought was both terrifying and strangely comforting. Truth has a way of finding daylight, even if we don't live to see it. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was helping create technology that would revolutionize emergency response systems, potentially saving countless lives, while my own heart could betray me at any moment. I wonder now if that knowledge, the fragility of my own existence, was what finally made me start considering breaking my silence. After all, what good are secrets when you're gone? What purpose does invisibility serve when there's no one left to protect? Years passed in a rhythm of quiet submission. Caroline graduated from Northeastern with a business degree, moved to New York for a marketing job, and our relationship settled into monthly phone calls and holiday visits. I continued my invisible work, watching as devices grew smaller, faster, more connected, each advance built on foundations I had helped lay but would never be credited for. It was spring 2007 when I found myself in the attic of my small colonial house in Lexington, searching for an old tax return. The afternoon light filtered through the single dusty window, creating golden pathways through dancing motes of dust. The space smelled of cedar and forgotten things, Thomas's fishing gear, Caroline's childhood toys I couldn't bear to give away, boxes of Christmas decorations we'd once hung together as a family. My hands moved automatically through stacked containers, muscle memory guiding me to where financial records should be. Instead, my fingers brushed against something unexpected, a cardboard box I didn't immediately recognize, unlabeled and pushed far back under the eaves. I pulled it forward, sneezing as dust billowed up, and felt a strange tightness in my chest that wasn't entirely due to my heart condition. Something about the box seemed to vibrate with forgotten significance, like a tuning fork struck years ago but still faintly resonating. When I opened it, the past rose up to meet me like a physical force. Inside lay an old lab notebook with my maiden name written in faded blue ink on the cover. Beneath it, folders containing early sketches of circuit designs, printouts of emails from colleagues congratulating me on successful tests, and a stack of technical papers I'd authored but never published. At the bottom, a manila envelope contained photographs I'd forgotten existed. My hands trembled slightly as I spread the contents across the dusty floorboards, pieces of my former self laid out like evidence at a crime scene. I was transported back to fluorescent-lit laboratories, the smell of solder and coffee, the exhilaration of solving problems no one else could crack. One photograph in particular caught my attention. I lifted it carefully, as if it might disintegrate at my touch. Boston, 1984. Me, still young, my dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, standing alongside 3 men in lab coats in front of a massive prototype. We were all smiling, flush with success after months of failed attempts. I turned the photo over. Someone had written on the back in neat block letters, "Breakthrough MEW microcircuit test successful, 50% size reduction achieved. MEW, Margaret Eleanor Winters, my initials, my achievement." I flipped through a technology magazine that had been folded and stored with the photo. There, on page 37, was a feature about the same project, hailing it as technology that would revolutionize communications for decades to come. In the image accompanying the article, the same machine, the same 3 men, but I had been cropped out. In the caption, my name was absent. My fingers trembled as they traced over the glossy magazine page. The sensation that washed over me wasn't just anger or sadness. It was a profound grief for the person I might have become, the recognition I might have earned, the example I might have set for Caroline and other young women. I sat back on my heels, surrounded by evidence of my erased contributions, and felt something break loose inside me, a dam holding back years of acquiescence. That night, I burned almost everything from the box in my backyard fire pit. The flames consumed my past work, sketches, notes, congratulatory emails from colleagues who later claimed credit for my innovations. I watched the fire climb higher, sparks rising into the darkening Massachusetts sky like the ghosts of opportunities lost. But I kept one page, a circuit diagram for a component now used in virtually every smartphone in the world, with my original calculations in the margins and my distinctive handwriting noting a key breakthrough in power efficiency. I couldn't explain why I saved this single document, perhaps as evidence, perhaps as talisman, perhaps simply as proof to myself that I hadn't imagined my own brilliance. I folded it carefully and placed it in the antique secretary desk Thomas had restored for our 5th anniversary. It sat there, this single artifact of my true professional legacy, through seasons of change, through Caroline's engagement and subsequent divorce, through my retirement from the lab, through David's rise to become CEO of the company that had grown rich on my unacknowledged work. When the first iPhone was released that summer, I stood in a crowded Apple store surrounded by excitement and innovation, and felt both pride and heartbreak knowing that inside that revolutionary device were components I had helped create, my invisible fingerprints embedded in technology that would change human connection forever. Caroline called me that night, bubbling with excitement about her new purchase. "Mom, you have to get one of these. It's amazing, like something from the future." I smiled into the receiver of my landline phone. "Maybe someday, honey. It can do everything, Mom. The whole internet in your pocket. Can you imagine?" I closed my eyes, leaning back in my kitchen chair. Yes, I could imagine it. I had imagined it decades ago, in laboratories where men took credit for women's visions. After we hung up, I took out the circuit diagram I'd saved from the fire and studied it in the soft light of my reading lamp. The elegant solution I'd discovered for miniaturizing power components was now standard in devices worldwide. Billions of people carried my ideas in their pockets without knowing my name. Was it enough to have contributed invisibly to this revolution? To know in my heart what I had done even if the world never would? I traced my finger over my own handwriting from 25 years earlier, the ambitious scrawl of a younger woman who believed her work would eventually speak for itself. Efficiency increased by 72% with new alloy. MEW. Those initials. A small act of defiance, a ghostly signature on work that would never officially be mine. Outside, spring rain began to fall, drumming gently on the roof of the house where I'd lived my quiet, invisible life. I carefully refolded the diagram and returned it to its hiding place, not yet knowing that in a few years' time, This single preserved document would become the key that unlocked everything I had lost. The truth has a weight to it, a physical presence that grows heavier with each passing year. By 2015, my silence had become a boulder I carried everywhere, crushing me beneath its mass. I was 66 years old, retired from the lab, but unable to escape the legacy of my choices. Every advertisement for a new smartphone felt like a personal mockery. Every tech breakthrough announcement a reminder of what might have been. Caroline was 39 now, a senior marketing executive at a major tech company in Silicon Valley. The irony wasn't lost on me. My daughter had built her career selling innovations that unknowingly contained her mother's stolen work. We'd settled into a comfortable but distant relationship. She saw me as somewhat quaint, loving but irrelevant in her fast-paced, cutting-edge world. I was the mom who still printed out emails and couldn't figure out Instagram. It was a Wednesday afternoon in March when everything changed. I remember because I'd been watching a documentary about women scientists, feeling a complicated mix of inspiration and bitterness, when my phone rang. Caroline's name flashed on the screen. "Mom." Her voice sounded strange, breathless, almost frightened. My heart immediately clenched with worry. "What's wrong, honey? Are you okay?" A pause, filled with the static of 3,000 miles between Massachusetts and California. "I'm fine, but something weird happened at work today. In a patent litigation meeting." I sat down slowly on my sofa, sensing a seismic shift approaching. "What kind of meeting?" "We're being sued by OpenCore Technologies over some fundamental component patents." Her words tumbled out faster now. "There was a whole PowerPoint presentation about patent lineage. And Mom, your name was on the screen. Margaret Eleanor Winters, listed as an uncredited original developer on patents that Apple licenses." The room seemed to tilt around me. For 30 years, my contributions had been buried under corporate paperwork and legal maneuvering. Now, suddenly, my name had surfaced in a high-stakes corporate lawsuit. "Mom," Caroline's voice sharpened with concern at my silence, "why would your name be in these documents? Why would some lawyer from OpenCore be saying that you're the original inventor of technology we use in our products? Why have you never told me about any of this?" I closed my eyes, my free hand clutching the arm of the sofa for support. "It's complicated, Caroline." "Complicated?" She made a sound between a laugh and a sob. "Mom, they're saying you hold foundational patents for technology that's in literally billions of devices. That can't just be a mistake. What's going on?" The moment stretched between us, 30 years of silence pressing against the fragile dam of my resolve. Then quietly I asked, "Are you sitting down, honey?" For the next hour, I told her everything. The early days at Bell Labs, the groundbreaking work on miniaturized circuits, David's betrayal, the documents I signed without understanding their implications. I told her about the choice I'd made to provide stability for her, rather than fight a legal battle I couldn't afford to wage. I told her about the 17 patents that should have carried my name, but instead made other people wealthy and renowned. When I finished, the silence on the line was profound. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Her voice was small, hurt, the voice of the 7-year-old who used to ask why her daddy couldn't come home from the hospital. "I didn't want you to see me as a victim or worse, a failure," I admitted. "And later, when you were grown, it seemed too late. What would be the point of dredging up ancient history?" "The point?" Caroline's voice rose. "The point, Mom, is that you're the real inventor of technology I've spent my career marketing. The point is that you let everyone, including me, believe you were just what?" I asked quietly, already knowing the answer. "Just my sweet, technologically challenged mom. Just a retired lab technician who never really made it." Her voice broke. "Do you have any idea how that makes me feel? To know I've been condescending to you about technology when all along you were a ghost in the machine," I finished for her. "That's what I've been for decades, present in every device but invisible to the naked eye." Through the phone, I heard her take a deep, shuddering breath. "I need to process this. The lawyer mentioned a patent court hearing next month in Boston. Will you go?" The question hung between us, heavy with implications. Would I finally step into the light after all these years? Would I publicly claim what had been taken from me? "I don't know," I answered honestly. "I made my peace with invisibility a long time ago." "Well, maybe you shouldn't have," Caroline said, an edge in her voice I'd rarely heard before. "Maybe you should have fought. Maybe you should have shown me what it looks like when a woman refuses to be erased." Her words hit me like a physical blow. Had my choice to remain silent taught my daughter all the wrong lessons? "I need to go," she said abruptly. "I have another meeting." "But Mom, this conversation isn't over." After she hung up, I sat motionless on my sofa as the afternoon light faded to dusk around me. On my coffee table sat the smartphone I'd finally conceded to buying, a device that contained at least 3 components based on my original designs. I picked it up, turning it over in my hands, feeling its familiar weight. How strange that this object, this collection of circuitry and glass, knew my true identity better than my own daughter did. It carried my legacy within its silicon heart, even as the world remained oblivious to my contribution. The patent court hearing Caroline mentioned would be held at the federal courthouse in Boston, the same building where, decades earlier, I'd decided not to file a legal challenge against David and the company. Life has a strange symmetry sometimes, bringing us back to crossroads we thought we'd left behind forever. That night I retrieved the circuit diagram I'd saved from the fire years ago. The yellowed paper felt fragile between my fingers, a tenuous connection to a past I'd tried to bury. But now, like a seed that had lain dormant through a long winter, the truth was pushing up through the soil, demanding light and air. My phone pinged with a text from Caroline. "Forwarded you the court details. Please think about testifying. The world should know the truth." I placed the circuit diagram back in its hiding place, my decision already crystallizing in my mind. After a lifetime of invisibility, perhaps it was finally time to be seen. 3 days after our phone call, Caroline arrived on my doorstep unannounced. The spring evening was cool, cherry blossoms from my front yard tree scattering in the breeze as I opened the door to find her standing there, her expression a storm of emotions I couldn't fully decipher. "I took a red-eye," she said by way of explanation, her designer luggage at her feet contrasting sharply with the worn welcome mat Thomas had made in his workshop 30 years before. "We need to talk in person." The kitchen had always been the heart of our home, where I'd helped Caroline with science projects, where we'd celebrated birthdays, where I'd sat alone contemplating the choices that had shaped our lives. Now we faced each other across the same oak table where I'd taught her to multiply fractions and bandaged skinned knees. 2 women separated by more than just the polished wood surface between us. Caroline had brought documents, printouts from the Open Core legal team, historical records they'd uncovered during discovery, timelines of patent filings that clearly showed the theft of my work. She spread them across the table methodically, building her case like the skilled professional she'd become. "They found your lab notebooks in an archive," she explained, pointing to photocopied pages of handwriting I recognized as my own. "Someone at Bell Labs stored them instead of destroying them after the acquisition. The dates, the calculations, they all prove you were the original inventor." I touched the photocopies gently, as if they might dissolve beneath my fingers. My past, preserved by some anonymous colleague who perhaps recognized the significance of what was happening, who perhaps had wanted the truth to eventually emerge. "Does Uncle David know about this?" she asked, her voice hardening on his name. I nodded slowly. "The lawyer contacted him before they approached OpenCore with their findings. He's not happy." "Not happy?" Caroline's laugh was bitter, so unlike her usual warm chuckle. "He stole your life's work, built his entire career on your ideas, and he's not happy that he might finally be exposed?" She shook her head in disgust. "Did you know he just sold his house in Wellesley for $8 million? $8 million, Mom. That's the price of your silence." "It wasn't about money," I began, but she cut me off. "Then what was it about? Why did you let him do this to you? Why did you let him erase you?" Tears were forming in her eyes now, angry and bewildered. "Why didn't you fight?" The confrontation I'd dreaded for decades was finally happening in my sunny kitchen, with birds chirping outside as if nothing momentous was occurring. How could I make her understand the impossible choice I'd faced as a young widow with a child to raise alone? "I was afraid," I admitted, the words scraping my throat like shards of glass. "Afraid of losing what little security we had. Afraid of dragging you through a legal battle that might take years. Afraid of hurting Ellen, who'd been nothing but kind to us after your father died." I reached for her hand across the table, but she pulled away. "I chose you, Caroline. Every time I chose you." "You didn't have to choose," she burst out, tears spilling over now. "You could have had both. Your work recognized and provided for me. Other women manage it. You just gave up." Her words struck like physical blows. Was that how she saw it? As surrender rather than sacrifice? The injustice of her assessment burned in my chest, igniting decades of suppressed anger. I did not give up, I said, my voice trembling with emotion. I continued working. I continued creating. I continued documenting everything even when I knew it would never bear my name. I stood up, suddenly unable to remain seated. Do you have any idea what it was like back then? A woman, a widow, in engineering in the 1980s? I was already fighting just to be in the room where decisions were made. But you let them take the credit? She insisted, rising to face me. You let them take your legacy. I gave you stability instead, I shouted, surprising us both with my volume. I chose to be your mother first and an inventor second. And yes, that meant swallowing my pride, burying my ambition, becoming invisible, but I would make the same choice again because you were what mattered most. Caroline stared at me, her expression shifting from anger to something more complex. But don't you see, Mom? By hiding who you really were, you denied me the chance to know you, really know you. All these years, I thought. Her voice broke. I thought you were just someone who settled for less, who didn't have big dreams or ambitions. I pitied you. The word, pitied, landed like a slap. I sank back into my chair, suddenly exhausted. Is that really how you've seen me all these years? She nodded, wiping tears from her cheeks. You were the mom who clipped coupons and drove the old Volvo until it died. The mom who couldn't program the VCR. The woman who worked at the same mid-level job for decades without advancement. She gestured to the documents on the table. Not this. Not someone who invented technology that changed the world. I felt the full weight of my choices then. Not just the professional recognition I'd sacrificed, but the more personal loss. My daughter's respect. In protecting her from hardship, I'd inadvertently taught her to undervalue me, to see me as someone small and unambitious. I'm sorry you couldn't be proud of me, I whispered, my own tears finally coming. That might be the greatest loss of all. That's just it, Caroline said, her voice thick with emotion. I would have been so proud. I am proud now that I know, but you never gave me the chance. We sat in silence for a long moment, the enormity of what had been lost, and what might still be salvaged, hanging between us. Outside, the last light of day was fading, shadows lengthening across my modest backyard, where Caroline had once played on a swing set Thomas built. Will you testify? She finally asked. Will you tell the world what was taken from you? I looked down at my hands, older now, veined and spotted with age, but still the same hands that had soldered delicate connections no one else could manage, that had sketched designs that would eventually shrink computers to pocket size. I don't know if it matters anymore, I said softly. It was so long ago. It matters, Caroline insisted, reaching across the table to take my hand. This time I didn't pull away. It matters to me. It matters to every young woman who dreams of being an inventor but doesn't see people like herself credited for innovations. It matters to history. In that moment, I felt the full crushing weight of injustice I'd carried for decades. I had given the world part of the technological foundation they used every day, yet had never received so much as a thank you. I had lost my sister's love, my professional recognition, and worst of all, my daughter's admiration, all because I'd chosen silence over fight. I looked around my kitchen, at the refrigerator still decorated with Caroline's childhood artwork, at the window over the sink where I'd stood washing dishes and watching seasons change for 30 years, at the ancient flip phone sitting on the counter beside Caroline's sleek smartphone. My life of sacrifice and invisibility, laid bare in the domestic details. I feel like I'm at the bottom of a well, I confessed, my voice barely audible. A life of obscurity and nothing to show for it except what, Mom? Caroline prompted, squeezing my hand. Except an old flip phone, I said, a bitter smile twisting my lips. While my work helps power the device you can't live without. The patent hearing was scheduled for the last Tuesday in April. For weeks I vacillated between determination and dread, rehearsing testimony I wasn't sure I would have the courage to deliver. Caroline stayed in Boston, taking remote work to be with me through the process. Each evening, we'd sit on the back porch watching spring unfold across my small garden, rebuilding the connection between us that had frayed over decades of misunderstanding. The night before the hearing, sleep eluded me entirely. I stood at my bedroom window at 3 a.m, watching moonlight cast silver patterns across the lawn where Caroline had taken her first steps. The weight of tomorrow pressed down on me like a physical force. After 30 years of invisibility, I was contemplating stepping into a spotlight I'd long ago relinquished my claim to. My reflection in the window glass looked ghostly. Silver hair, lined face, eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Was this woman, this grandmother figure, really going to stand up in a courtroom and declare herself the inventor of technology that had transformed the modern world? The absurdity of it made me almost laugh. Who would believe me now? When dawn finally broke, I dressed with unusual care. A navy blue suit I'd bought years ago for a colleague's retirement party, a silver necklace Thomas had given me on our last anniversary before his diagnosis. Caroline watched me from the doorway of my bedroom, her expression a mixture of pride and concern. "You don't have to go through with this if you don't want to," she said softly. "No one would blame you for walking away." I adjusted my collar, meeting her eyes in the mirror. "I would blame me," I replied simply. "I've walked away once already. I don't think I can do it again." The federal courthouse in Boston stood imposing against the spring sky, its granite facade impassive to the human dramas that unfolded within. Caroline and I climbed the steps together, her hand occasionally touching my elbow in silent support. Inside, the marble hallway echoed with footsteps and muted conversations. I felt oddly detached, as if watching myself from a distance. The lawyer from Open Corps met us outside the courtroom, a young woman with intelligent eyes and a firm handshake. "Mrs. Winters, I'm Catherine Donovan. Thank you for coming." She gestured to a conference room off the main hallway. "We have a few minutes before the proceedings begin. I'd like to go over your testimony once more." As we followed her, I caught sight of a familiar figure down the corridor. David, older now but still carrying himself with the same confident authority I remembered. Our eyes met briefly across the distance. He looked away first, turning to confer with a man in an expensive suit who was surely his attorney. Caroline saw him too. I felt her stiffen beside me. "Is that him? Uncle David?" I nodded, watching emotions play across her face. Confusion, anger, hurt. She had childhood memories of this man bringing her presents, swinging her up onto his shoulders at family gatherings. Now she was seeing him through new eyes, as the thief who had stolen her mother's legacy. "Don't," I said quietly, placing a restraining hand on her arm as she seemed ready to confront him. "This isn't the place." The conference room was austere, a long table, uncomfortable chairs, a window overlooking the parking lot. Catherine spread documents before me, explaining the procedure, what questions might be asked, how to respond. I nodded mechanically, barely processing her words. My attention was fixed on a single page she'd placed before me, a copy of the original patent filing for my miniaturized capacitor design, with David's name listed as the sole inventor. My hands trembled slightly as I touched the document. Here it was, the official record of theft, preserved in government archives for decades. Looking at it, I felt something unexpected. Not the anger I'd anticipated, but a profound sadness for the young woman I'd been, who'd allowed her work to be taken because she didn't believe she could fight back and win. The courtroom itself was smaller than I'd imagined, less dramatic than the television versions. When I was called to testify, my heels clicked loudly on the polished floor as I made my way to the witness stand. I was sworn in, my voice barely audible as I promised to tell the truth. A truth that had been buried for longer than some of the lawyers in the room had been alive. The questioning began gently, establishing my background, my education, my role at Bell Labs in the 1980s. As I spoke, my voice grew stronger, memories flooding back with surprising clarity. The excitement of discovery, the camaraderie of the lab, the precise moment when I realized the new alloy combination would allow for the miniaturization we'd been seeking. Then came the harder questions. Did you willingly assign your rights to this patent? Were you aware of what you were signing? Why didn't you contest the patent attribution at the time? I could feel David's eyes on me as I answered, could sense Caroline's tension from her seat behind the plaintiff's table. The truth, when I finally spoke it aloud in its entirety, felt both liberating and terribly late. I was a widow with a young daughter, I explained, my voice steady despite the emotion building in my chest. I needed my job. I needed health insurance. I was told that challenging the patent assignment would result in my termination. I paused, glancing briefly at David before continuing. I chose financial security for my child over recognition for my work. It was a choice no inventor should ever have to make. The proceedings continued for hours. Technical discussions of circuit designs and material properties, corporate ownership transfers, statutory limitations. Throughout it all, I felt strangely calm, as if having finally spoken my truth aloud, nothing else that happened in that courtroom could truly touch me. As the day's session drew to a close, the judge asked if I had anything to add to my testimony. I hadn't expected this opportunity. I looked at Caroline, her eyes shining with unshed tears, then at David, his expression carefully neutral but his posture rigid with tension. For 30 years, I began slowly. I've carried this secret. I've watched technology I helped create transform the world while my contribution remained invisible. I've seen my work in every smartphone, every tablet, every wireless device that's become indispensable to modern life. I took a deep breath. I'm not here for money or recognition, though both would have been welcome 30 years ago. I'm here because history should be accurate, because young women entering technology fields should know that women like me helped build the foundation they stand on, because truth matters even when it arrives late. When court adjourned, Caroline was waiting for me in the hallway, her face alight with a pride I'd never seen directed at me before. "Mom," she whispered, embracing me tightly, "you were magnificent." That evening, exhausted beyond words, I sat with Caroline in my small living room. A spring storm had blown in, rain pattering against the windows in a soothing rhythm. Neither of us had much appetite for the dinner we'd ordered, both still processing the day's events. "What happens now?" Caroline asked, curled in the armchair across from me, looking younger somehow, more vulnerable than the confident executive I'd grown accustomed to. "I don't know," I admitted. "The lawyers say the case could take months to resolve. The patents might be reassigned, there might be financial settlements." I shrugged slightly. "But that's not what matters to me anymore." She looked at me questioningly, and I reached for the single document I'd preserved all these years, the circuit diagram with my initials in the margins. I handed it to her, this fragment of my true self that had survived decades of invisibility. "What matters," I said softly as she unfolded the yellowed paper with reverent hands, "is that you know the truth now. No more secrets between us." Caroline's tears fell onto the old diagram as she studied it, her fingers tracing my handwritten notes in the margins. "I'll never look at my phone the same way again," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. In that moment, something long broken between us began to heal. Not with dramatic declarations or sweeping gestures, but with the simple, profound relief of truth finally spoken aloud. We were mother and daughter, seeing each other clearly, perhaps for the first time. Sometimes our most profound sacrifices remain invisible to those we love most. For decades, I chose silence over recognition, stability over justice, my daughter's security over my rightful place in technological history. Was it worth it? The question haunts me still. Would you have fought against a system designed to erase you, even if fighting meant risking everything? Or would you, like me, have chosen to be the ghost in the machine, present in every device but invisible to the world? The truth, I've learned, is that silence has a price we don't fully understand until it's too late. In protecting my daughter from hardship, I inadvertently denied her the chance to truly know me, to be proud of what I'd accomplished against impossible odds. Our legacy isn't just what we create with our hands and minds. It's also the stories we choose to tell, the truths we dare to speak aloud. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give those we love isn't protection from life's hardships, but honesty about our struggles, our failures, and our triumphs. If my story has touched you today, if you've ever been made to feel invisible or had your contributions diminished, know that you are not alone. Your truth matters, even when speaking it feels impossible. Don't wait decades as I did to claim your rightful place. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Subscribe to hear more stories of hidden resilience. And remember, the technology that connects us is powerful, but not nearly as powerful as the courage to be seen for who we truly are.